Hello and welcome back to the class series entitled Introduction to Orthodoxy. I'm Father John Brown and I'm a priest at Holy Transfiguration Greek Orthodox Church. Last week, for our last class, we looked at the events leading up to the Great Schism, split between Eastern and Western halves of the church that happened in 1054. So we will continue in our study of the history of Orthodoxy beginning at that point. After the Great Schism of 1054, there was still hope on both sides that the differences could still be resolved. However, the next series of events made reconciliation impossible. By the end of the 11th century, the Crusades were well underway. The Crusades were a series of military expeditions under the banner of the cross put together by the Pope of Rome and the European kings with the purpose of reconquering the Holy Land from the Muslims. The Crusades provided the final blow to the unity of Eastern and Western churches. The Crusades not only put the sword between Christians and Muslims, but also gave the final blow to the unity of Eastern and Western Christianity. The Crusaders plundered indiscriminately. Orthodox Christians suffered along with the Muslims at the hands of the European Christians. They liberated lands from the Muslim overlords for a short time, but the local Orthodox Christians suffered the consequences of the retaliation of the Muslims once the Crusaders withdrew their forces and returned to their homelands. The Fourth Crusade, and which resulted in the sack of Constantinople. The Fourth Crusade was originally meant to conquer Jerusalem through an invasion of Egypt. Instead, in April 1204, the Crusaders of the West invaded and conquered the city of Constantinople. It has been often described as one of the most profitable and disgraceful sacks of a city in history. The Crusader army entered the unsuspecting Constantinople and looted the largest and wealthiest Christian city in the world. Most of the city's treasures were carried back to Venice. The civilian population was abused. Women were raped. The emperor and patriarch were deposed and temporarily replaced with loyalists to Rome. The Christians of the East were horrified. Their psychological outrage against the Latins made reconciliation with them impossible. Here's a map of what is the temporary ascendancy of the West over the East. The Latin occupation of the East from 1204 to 1261. When the Eastern Roman Empire emerged from the occupation of the Latin Christians in the middle of the 13th century, it had been severely weakened. The doors were thus open for the entrance of the advancing army of the Ottoman Turks, who were already exploiting the weakening of the Seljuk Sultanate and expanding their territories in all directions, starting in the area of Bursa. We'll look a little bit about the Fall of Constantinople. The next major event in the history of Orthodoxy occurred in 1453. The Muslim armies had already conquered much of the territory of the Eastern Roman Empire. And you can see in orange from this map of the Mediterranean, North Africa, and the Middle East, you can see that everything in orange had been conquered in a fairly short time by the followers of Islam and Muhammad. By 1453, the Muslim Turkish armies were closing in on Constantinople, which had been severely weakened by the Crusaders. In desperation, the Eastern Emperor and Patriarch pleaded for military help from the West. Bishops from both the East and the West met in Florence, Italy in 1439. The Latin delegates offered military assistance against the Turks in return for the Eastern Roman capitulation on all the theological issues dividing them. The Orthodox would have to accept the Roman doctrines of filioque, purgatory, unleavened bread in communion, and especially the universal authority of the papacy over both East and West. 19 of the 20 Eastern bishops present signed the document, except for one, Mark of Ephesus, who proclaimed that he would rather live under the Muslims than betray his faith. Consequently, the Union of Florence, as it was called, failed, and the Western armies were never sent. On the 29th of May, 1453, after a long siege, Constantinople fell to the Turks. The rest of the Eastern Roman Empire soon followed. The largest Christian church in the world, Hagia Sophia, which means holy wisdom in Greek, was converted to a mosque. Eastern Christians entered a period of severe persecution under Islamic law. For the Greek-speaking Christians, the oppression lasted for the next 372 years. For the Christians in Asia Minor, now known as Turkey, the oppression continues to this day. Before the fall of the Christian East, another major event in the history of Orthodoxy took place. In the 9th century, Orthodox lands were boxed in on three sides. To the west was Catholic Europe, to the south and east was Muslim territory, but the north was uncharted and pagan from the perspective of the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Empire. To the north of the Christian East was a collection of Slavic nations who were open to outside religious influences. The Kingdom of Moravia was being pressured by the Latin West. Many unwelcome Catholic missionaries were arriving, and the Franks, one of the largest of the Western powers at the time, were seeking political support. Seeking to maintain his independence, King Rastislav asked the Greek Patriarch to send missionaries to convert his people to Orthodoxy. You can see on that map, this is the area, the Slavic territories that were north of the Eastern Roman Empire. In response to the king's request, the Greek Patriarch sent two brothers, Cyril and Methodius. These two missionaries moved to Moravia and began the first Orthodox evangelization of the Slavs. They became fluent in the local language. The Moravians had no written language, so Cyril and Methodius created one, translating the Bible and service books, and taught the Moravians how to read. This is an icon of these two marvelous and successful evangelists, Cyril and Methodius. Through the work of St. Cyril and Methodius, the Moravians became literate and Orthodox at the same time. Here's an example of, you can see the influence of the Greek alphabet on the Cyrillic or Slavic alphabet, which is now the standard alphabet throughout all the Slavic countries. And you can see the heritage of Cyrillic, named after St. Cyril. It's still called Cyrillic even by people who may have no idea of that. And the Slavic alphabet bears a strong connection to the Greek alphabet. For example, you can see alpha, the same, the letter gamma, the third letter in alphabet is the Greek alphabet's the same in the Slavic or Cyrillic alphabet. They're not exactly the same, but you can see a strong representation there of the Greek alphabet in what was the brand new and created Cyrillic alphabet. About a century after Cyril and Methodius, the largest of the Slavic nations converted to Orthodoxy. Prince Vladimir, the Russian pronunciation would be Vladimir, ruled the vast kingdom of Kievan Rus. Although he was a pagan, he was aware of the four monotheist faiths that surrounded his empire, and he was considering converting to one of them. He sent a delegation from his court to then Islamic Bulgaria, but they reported that the people were joyless. They also reported that they forbade alcohol and pork, so Vladimir immediately ruled them out. He sent another delegation to the Jewish communities exiled in his area, but when he learned that they had lost their capital and lands, he decided that their own God had abandoned them. He sent another delegation to Catholic territories, but they returned unimpressed. However, the delegation to Orthodox lands returned with a very different report. They attended a divine liturgy at the Church of Hagia Sophia in Constantinople and were awestruck. They reported to Vladimir, we no longer knew whether we were in heaven or on earth, they reported, nor such beauty we did not know how to tell of it. So that's a picture of the remains of Hagia Sophia, which is now a mosque, but you can get a picture of the size and the original beauty. Of course, all the icons have been removed, and the quotations from the Quran in Arabic have replaced them in some places, but you can see why the just looking at this building, even in its somewhat fallen state, was still incredible to the delegation sent by Prince Vladimir, and they came back with such a glowing report. Based on these reports, Prince Vladimir decided to become a Christian, specifically an Orthodox Christian. He was baptized in 987 AD and took the Orthodox name Basil. He then ordered his entire kingdom to be baptized. There were many to be baptized and few priests to baptize them, so they performed mass baptism. So here's a depiction from those days of a mass baptism taking place in a river or a lake by a priest. The people of Kiev and Rus accepted the Orthodox faith gladly. Constantinople sent many clergy to help the people in their new faith. As a result of the conversion of the Slavs, in an extremely short period of time, the number of Orthodox Christians and amount of Christian territory more than doubled. So you can get a picture of the size of the expansion and the vastness of this newly Orthodox land of Kiev and Rus. And it's the better part of this, almost the same size as Western Europe. So it was a dramatic increase in the size of the Eastern Orthodox faith. Kiev and Rus formed the basis of Russia and all the other Slavic peoples of Eurasia. Today, they are the largest group of Orthodox Christians in the world, both by population as well as landmass. So everything in green you see to the right there would be Eastern Christian in origin. Beginning in 1453, Greek Orthodox Christians endured severe persecution by their Turkish occupiers. Their restrictions included most of their churches were converted into mosques. Those few that were left were always the smallest and the least desirable ones. The ones that were left for Christian worship were not nearly enough to provide for a country that was overwhelmingly Orthodox. Those churches could not be repaired without permission, which was rarely granted. The church bells were silenced. The crosses could not be displayed. The testimony of Christians was not admissible in court, so crimes against Christians by Muslims were never investigated. Christians were required to pay a heavy tax called the jizya, and there was also not so subtle financial incentive for Christians to leave their Christian faith and to become Muslims, and they would therefore be exempted from that special heavy tax on Christians and Christians alone. Christian priests were forbidden to preach or teach. Christian parents were not allowed to teach their own children about Christianity, although they usually did, but it was illegal. Christian bishops were forced to collect taxes from their own people to pay the Ottoman occupiers. Thousands of Christian boys were taken by force from their families and forced to convert to Islam and became frontline soldiers called Janissaries in the Turkish army. They were used as shock troops against other Christian countries. And when they died in large numbers, because they were usually on the front lines of an attack, the Turks did not care because they were from Christian families. This was a tragic period of time certainly for Greek Orthodoxy. Orthodox Christians endured these conditions under the Muslim Turks and maintained their faith for 375 years. So if you think about it, that's a longer time than the United States has existed by far. Then, beginning in 1821, the Greek-speaking Christians began to actively rebel against the Turks in what is known as the Greek War of Independence. They were finally assisted by Britain, France, and Russia. And after a 9-year struggle, the Turks capitulated and signed the Treaty of Adrianople in 1829, which was recognized by the international community in 1830. And the country of Greece was established as a modern state. However, remember what I just read are those Orthodox Christians living in Greece, but that does not include Orthodox Christians that were then and still are, those that are left, that are living in modern day Turkey. The Orthodox Christians in what is Turkey today became a minority in their own former country. Between 1894 and 1924, the number of Christians in Asia Minor, to Turkey, fell from some 3 to 4 million to just tens of thousands, and from 20% of the area's population to under 2% of the population. That was a quotation from the Wall Street Journal. The few Orthodox Christians in Turkey now remain under the virtually, to this day, they still remain under virtually the same conditions that existed after the fall of Constantinople in 1453. To this day, the Patriarch of Constantinople, the highest ranking Orthodox bishop in the world, lives under virtual house arrest by the Turkish government. 1 century after the Greek Orthodox were delivered from Turkish oppression, the Slavic Orthodox entered their own period of persecution. In 1917, the Communist Party seized power in Russia. They proceeded on a program to destroy Orthodox Christianity. To be fair, they wanted to destroy all religion, but the Orthodox were the overwhelming majority, so therefore the Orthodox Church caught the brunt of their plan of destruction. They destroyed the Church of Christ the Savior in Moscow, the second largest Orthodox church in the world at that time. The number of Orthodox churches in the Soviet Union was reduced from 30,000 in 1927 to less than 500 in 1940. It is estimated that between 12 and 20 million Orthodox Christians were murdered under Soviet communism. At least 106,000 Orthodox clergymen were killed. This oppression lasted for 74 years. The Slavic Orthodox churches were finally liberated when communism collapsed in 1991. Now, you're probably wondering, okay, bring us up to the present. What does this have to do with us today as the Orthodox Church? It surprises many people to learn that Orthodoxy first came to North America by way of Russia and Alaska. The Orthodox faith first came to North America in the 1700s. Orthodox Russia then had a colony in Alaska. Russian Orthodoxy migrated from Alaska to the Western US beginning in the 1700s. Other Orthodox Christians migrated from the predominantly Orthodox countries to the Eastern US as part of a broad wave of migration in the 1800s and even to the early 1900s. So you can see how Orthodoxy came from Russia to Alaska to the western part of the United States, and all the countries that would be in red in the map that you see, which are the Orthodox countries, going all the way from Russia through Greece, through Cyprus, and also including the predominantly Orthodox countries that then existed in the Middle East. They formed their part in what was a broader wave of migration from all over the world to the eastern United States, primarily Ellis Island, and brought their Orthodoxy with them. And so that's how Orthodoxy began in the United States, one from the West and one from the East. It's important to know that when the Orthodox faith was spreading, it was not just spreading to the United States, but also throughout the world. You can see in this map here that Orthodoxy was spread from Orthodox countries to many, many parts of the world. In our church, we have people that are from South Africa, for example, whose ancestors fled to South Africa and to Australia and other parts of the world. So this diaspora of Orthodoxy is not limited just to the continental United States. As this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all of the world as a witness to all the nations. Our Lord said this in Matthew 24, verse 14. And you can see this today. It's important for people looking at Orthodoxy to see that it's not just a religion that's confined to a certain part of the world and newly arrived in North America, but that's about it. This little photo montage can give you an understanding that Orthodoxy is now worldwide in scope. There are Orthodox churches in Africa. There's a picture of an African bishop. There are Orthodox Native American churches in Alaska. It was the earliest settlers of Orthodoxy in Alaska converted large numbers of the Native American tribes there very peacefully without bloodshed and without some of the tragedies that were to take place to other Native American tribes elsewhere. Then there are Orthodox churches in Japan today. It's a substantial number that are there. And those are also have been around for well over 100 years. There's an Orthodox monastery and orphanage in Latin America. That's a picture of a wonderful work being done by Orthodox nuns in Guatemala that provide a refuge and place of care for orphans in Latin America. So it's important for everyone to understand that the Orthodox Church is now worldwide in scope and active on every continent except the Antarctic. Well, this concludes today's class. Again, feel free to send me an email at that email address or to comment on the comment section of the YouTube video itself. I'll be paying attention and I will respond if I have means to do so. So until next week's class, may the Lord God bless everyone here.